Hello, everybody. Just take a breath. Hello. My name is Stephanie Gary. I am so incredibly proud to say that I am a vice president of the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York, and I'm just honored, incredibly honored to be in this space. This really is sacred space because of all of you, the work that's being done, and here we go talking about more. I'm sorry, say what? Yes, I know, I got it. I'm on it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to tell you what we're talking about. And that is global humanitarian crises. I just want to say that I hope you had, I could feel it, an interesting discussion. And I want you, if you're so moved, and I know you are, to take out your phones. Take out your phones, and I want you to text 44321. And once you do that, I want you to type in Convening 22. And up will pop something where you can be here on 60th Street off Madison Avenue, and you can make a difference. And what an incredible feeling that is in light of all that we're hearing about. So I urge you to do that. Okay. So what we're going to do now is talk about another issue: global humanitarian needs and refugees, whether it's in Ukraine or Ethiopia or at our own border in the United States. We need to talk about what people are experiencing, what they're actually going through. So we have Dr. Paula Rakoff, we have Melanie Neeser, and zooming in, I believe from Israel, I think it's Israel, I think so, we have Charlene Seidel. But before we get to these fabulous speakers, we're going to hear a powerful reflection from a JWFNY board member. I'm happy to say a colleague, a friend. Haftam Yitzhak Heathwood is going to share a few words with us. So Haftam, please.
I think I was said, huh? It's okay. It's okay. I'm gonna make a few grammar and spelling mistakes, so please forgive me. Yes, thank you so much. So good morning, everyone. This is an honor for me to be here, able to speak with you, and grateful for your attention. My name is Haftam Yitzhak Heathwood, and I'm here to speak with you today about something that has been on my mind for a while now. I was born in Ethiopia in 1987, but by the end of 1990, my family and I escaped the civil war that was tearing our country apart, and we fled to Israel. I was only 3 when we became refugees of this war that robbed me from my homeland and the life I could have lived there. The Ethiopian Jewish people had lived the land of Aksum for centuries, but years of corrupted leaders and civil war were not just destroying our way of life, it was destroying us. Brilliant minds and heroes of Ethiopia, with nowhere left to turn, desperately wrote thousands of letters to Israel to get us out, but they didn't act right away. We're labeled by many Israelis as having the mental outlook of children, that our cultural divide will just be too great to properly adjust to Israeli life, or that we weren't even Jewish. The same brilliant minds in Ethiopia that spent pleas to Israel began floating letters to Jewish here in the United States. After almost a decade of trying to get someone to pay attention, with pressure from the United States, Israel began to mobilize the Preventing of a shende de goyim, which in Yiddish for mean an embarrassment in front of non-Jewish, and aimed to avoid controversy by ignoring our pleas. Eventually, we made it to Israel in one more, the most impressive evacuation of human history. I look back and wonder how many Jewish lives could have been saved had Israel acted sooner, but at least we finally made it to Israel. Flash forward today, Russia began to inflict war in Ukraine, and once again, my memories and feeling back to stir up inside of me. It has always angered me when I see people who are oppressed, and the situation in Ukraine was no different. I feel this way because I've been there. My father and mother have been there. We have walked this path before, and I will never wish this torment on anyone. It then warmed my heart when I saw how the world spoke at one voice that this was not okay. To see humanity come together like that was what missing in this world. But this warmth I felt in my heart soon turned cold once the memories of my people sank in. Once the war broke out in Ukraine, the assistance was almost immediate. I'm not saying for one moment that wasn't the correct reaction, but I want to know where the immediate assistance was when the heroes of Ethiopia wrote letters pleading Israel for help for almost a decade. Where was the immediate assistance to the humanitarian crisis in Congo when the crumbling government has failed to curtail many Ebola outbreaks, oppression, and unrest? Where was the immediate assistance when the Yemen civil war broke out, or when the traditional government of Sudan has failed to keep its people alive, or even when my homeland in Ethiopia and genocide that is being committed against thousands in Tigray regime? Think that local politics make the difference? Here are raw universal numbers. Since Ukraine war broke out, 9,000 are dead. In Yemen, 11,000 are dead. In Congo, 100,000 dead. In Sudan, 400,000 dead. In Ethiopia, 500,000 dead. These are numbers, those are deaths. Those are undeniable. Does a Black life in Ethiopia matter less than white life in Ukraine? Or rather, should we stop caring about Ukraine so we can care about Ethiopia instead? No. What we should be doing is paying attention to all who need us. We need to see human suffering for what it is. Israel took almost a decade to help me and my people who are Jewish. Meanwhile, within the first month of Russian invasion over 11,000 non-Jewish were taken in by Israel, given aid and temporary housing. I don't have a simple solution to this, but I know the first step to solve any problem is admitting that you have one. I am going to leave with a quote from Captain Hawkeye Press from MASH that displays any notion that war can be brushed aside with any cliche remarks like war is hell. There's always war going on. War is the world's favorite spectator sport. But war isn't hell. War is war, and hell is hell. And out of two, war is a lot worse. There's no innocent bystanders in hell, but war is chock full of them. Little kids, old ladies. In fact, except a few brows, almost everybody involved inside are bystanders. This war game being played by leaders all over the world have real human cost. And until it happened to you, will it go unnoticed? Thank you all for listening, and I hope we can all begin to do something and much more.
Okay. Thank you, Haftam. Thank you. Hi. Hi, okay. So I'm going just to remind you when you speak to please hold the mic close so all of our friends on Zoom can hear us. So let me first just say that Melanie works with refugees and asylum seekers from all over the world with HIAS. And she will be offering us a global perspective. And if you have not yet had the chance to see her TED Talk, I want you to watch it. It's really inspiring. Paula has just completed an incredible mission to the Ukraine. And so you will be talking to us about your perspective from the ground there. And Charlene will bring a philanthropic perspective through her work with the Leash Tag Foundation, particularly in the area of Syrian refugees. So here we are. Let's talk about, and I know you're going to hear these questions often, but it really gives us a real landscape so we can figure out what's going on out there. Let's talk about the landscape of refugees, of asylum seekers. Let's talk about what the difference is, because I would venture to say a number of people in this room don't know what the difference is between refugees and asylum seekers. And I want you to talk about also, as a Jewish woman leader, what is your work all about? So please, Melanie.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I think everything I'm going to say is just kind of going to fall under everything that Haftam just said, kind of filling in some color there, but everything she said frames all the work that we do at HIAS. And I agree 100% with the concern about, how we respond to different crises, who we care about, who we don't care about. At HIAS, we serve refugees in 20 different countries around the world. I'll talk a little bit about our work, but I think first we'll get to that question of, what's a refugee, what's an asylum seeker? So actually, the definition of refugee and asylum seeker or asylee are the same. They come out of the 1951 Refugee Convention, which was a treaty that followed the Holocaust, because the world got together and said, never again should we have a system where people who are fleeing for their lives get returned back to places where they will be killed. And that remains the legal framework in many countries around the world, including the US. That is the law, that we shall not return anyone who fears persecution based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a social group to a place where they fear persecution. We are not complying with that law here and other places around the world, but that is the law. An asylum seeker is someone who presents themselves at a border or an airport and says, I am a refugee, I meet that definition, I would like to seek asylum here. I'd like to show you that I meet that definition. So you show up, and this is the kind of the US framework, right? So someone who shows up at the border and says, I'm a refugee, I'm fleeing persecution, I'm entitled to hearing under international and US law. I want to show you that I can't be sent back to where I came from. In the US, we kind of have a different term for a refugee. We use that to refer to people who come in through the US Refugee Admissions Program. So that's a program that was started in 1980 with the Refugee Act of 1980. Congress did not implement that 1951 convention until 1980 in the US. And that is a system where, and HIAS is one of the 9 national agencies that works with the US government. The US government works with the UN to identify refugees overseas and screens them overseas and vets them, make sure they meet the refugee definition, and then brings them to you at the US through our formal system, the US Refugee Admissions Program. That started in 1980. The average until the former president per year was about 90,000 a year. At sometimes it was as high as 200,000 when we were admitting many Soviet Jews and others in the 80s and 90s. After 9/11, the number plummeted, but President Bush actually brought it back pretty quickly. But then the whole thing was just kind of dismantled, that whole program under the last administration, and we're still dealing with the ramifications of that. But the government, the State Department works with US organizations, most of which are faith-based. HIAS is the Jewish organization. And then we work with Jewish Family Service agencies and others around the country. Many of you, and Kai is here, many of you are familiar with that program that actually welcomes the refugees to their community. So that's the difference. And then we have highest, actually, we work with vulnerable migrants. So beyond refugees and asylum seekers, because we don't want, when we're providing services, for example, at the US border, we don't want to say, well, do you meet the refugee definition before we give you, some, a know your rights presentation, or before we give you psychosocial counseling. It's more focused on the need rather than the legal status. So, and then there are, of course, immigrants who come for a variety of reasons.
Great, thank you. Paula, talk about what made you decide to get up from your very successful practice at NYU and go to the Ukraine? What was that process all about for you?
Well, I've done this kind of work before. I've done this kind of volunteer work before. Actually, it started in the mid-1990s with the New Israel Fund, volunteering with Physicians for Human Rights in Israel and what's now Palestine. That really started with meeting Barbara Dobkin, who I know is the visionary of this organization. And then actually my first volunteer trip after Israel was with the American Jewish World Service. Ruth Messenger sent a few people, a few doctors, to Nicaragua. And in Nicaragua, I met other relief workers, and they were mostly Christian relief workers who were really Christian. Like, they were there because they were Christian relief workers. And I met Jews who were there as relief workers, who were mostly assimilated Jews. And that really stuck with me. And every time I've done work abroad, I went to Ghana, South Africa, again to Israel, again to Palestine, I really go as a Jew, a Jewish relief worker. So when the war broke out in Ukraine, and I saw all the refugees going to Poland, it obviously really spoke to me for a few reasons. Most of us in this room had grandparents or great-grandparents who came from that area, who not really came, had to escape from that area. And I wanted to show up again as a Jewish relief worker. There were American organizations going, but that was important to me. And I sent a few emails out to various Israeli organizations. And there was one organization called Lev Echad, One Heart, who responded. And they were actually there, and a very small nonprofit in Israel that's a crisis relief organization, really started by 3 18-year-olds 20 years ago, who thought that the people who had to leave Gaza, the Jews who had to leave Gaza, needed help packing up. It was like very simple. And like in 2 weeks, they had 10,000 volunteers. And so Lev Echad shows up in Israel during times of crisis, whether it's COVID, whether it's the Lebanon war. And so the the two leaders of Lev Echad, Tomer Dror and Erez Eshel, started sending pre-military 17 and 18-year-olds to the border of Poland, Ukraine, to help the refugees cross the border, carry their suitcases, give them sandwiches, help them with the babies. So when I met Erez, I said, why don't you send doctors? And he said, okay. It was really that simple, very Israeli. Let's do it. And so really, like 2 months later, I had a few other doctors come with me, and NYU sent us with a lot of medical equipment. And it was very, very powerful because we went to the border towns of Poland and Ukraine, and refugee centers were really schools, or even an old castle that was abandoned that became a home to the women and the children. And we went into Lviv doing the same thing. And this was the vest that we really never took off, that Lev Echad gave to us. So we really show up all the time, whether in Poland or Ukraine, wearing the Israeli flag, with Israelis with us, which of course takes on a whole other meaning. And I have to say, doing this kind of relief work, you just meet like the best people who are willing to do it. And then it became not only doctors. So the first time I went in May, another family from the Upper West Side came with their 2 teenagers, and they basically painted a refugee center, built a playground, always wearing this vest. So all the Ukrainians we met, all the Polish people we met, knew that we were Jewish. And then another delegation came, again, mostly non-doctors and a few doctors, including my daughter, who's here. And actually, one of the most powerful things she said was, even though she'd been to Israel many, many times, it was going to Poland that made her realize how important Israel is. And now another delegation that did not include me just came back, a few doctors, a few non-doctors. So my dream, and it's very basic stuff that the people need. The kids need someone to play with. The adults didn't leave Ukraine with enough medication. The Poles have been amazing. They're supposed to be part of the Polish medical care, and they are, but it's very hard to maneuver in that large system. And my dream is that more people with Lev Echad, the Israeli organization, show up with these orange vests so that Poles really know that Jews have come back. And it's really pretty glaring to be in Poland and see what's not there.
Thank you. And I want to point out that Daniel Booten is here, who is the executive director of the Afia Foundation. It does tremendous work, and I know that you have been supplying a lot of goods to Ukraine as well. Charlene, we haven't forgotten about you. I know. Hi. I want you to talk about, from your perspective, thoughts on crisis funding, as well as thoughts on general funding. What's the balance there, and how do you view this on this landscape as well?
Good question. Well, first of all, good evening from Jerusalem, and good morning and midday to all of you. I'm really sorry not to be there. I know I have some friends and wonderful people in the audience, and I'm sorry not to be there in person. But really grateful for the opportunity to join you virtually. So I want to also, I guess, start before I get to the crisis and general funding about talking about why the Lichtag Foundation has stepped forward in two major refugee crises, or two major world global humanitarian crises, even though we are a local foundation with two localities, San Diego and Jerusalem. And so when people hear that we've been involved in the Syrian refugee initiative that you referred to earlier, and also we've been really fortunate to administer a fairly major grassroots Ukraine initiative, they wonder why. And I think one reason is, I mean, there are a few, but is that we really believe that philanthropy is the risk capital of social change, that philanthropy can be more flexible, more nimble, act more rapidly, act with more urgency and fewer stakeholders, and has the bully pulpit that we are going to seize to really fill in gaps, force different groups to work together, and also balance the work, which this work is, the work of refugees and global humanitarian crises, is a sprint, and it's also a marathon at the same time. So you referred to crisis funding and general funding, and we have done both, but I think that's a big reason that we feel that philanthropy should be involved, and why we at Lichtag were involved. I also want to say that we at Lichtag think of ourselves as a talent agency, and so Dr. Rakoff referred to Tomer Dor actually earlier, who I think is on the Zoom because he texted me. He is one of I first met Tomer about 10 years ago. He was on the front lines, as you said, in Ukraine, and he's one of the foremost Jerusalem social activists, the young activists that we work with. And so a lot of our work has been supporting those on the ground who are actually like doing the work, who have the local knowledge, who understand, making the space for them, uplifting their voices, and also uplifting like narratives and creating space for refugees and immigrants themselves to create their own futures. And I just want to also say, like, another word that most in both the Syrian refugee initiative that we were part of and the Ukraine initiative, I don't think it's a coincidence that most of the frontline our frontline partners have been women. I mean, women are the first and last responders in refugee situations. They have the ability to innovate during a crisis because of necessity. And so we've worked primarily with women, maybe not by design, but that's really what's happened. And as I reflected, and I kind of realized that as I reflected for these comments today and for joining you today, how powerful that talent has been. And so in terms of our goal as a foundation we have the time, we have the money, and we have a long view and the ability to act urgently in the short term. Women are our best bets in terms of talent support. I just want to give another shout out to somebody in the audience who is really organizing women leaders in Ukraine, who's Karen Gershon, who heads up Project Kesher. If you don't know Karen, you should talk to her during the break, and she's been an extraordinary leader. Women are also able to identify needs that others can't. Again, you mentioned Poland, Dr., and them being so welcoming. We also found that, you know, there was unfortunately a great deal of rape and sexual assault that happened, and pregnancies that occurred as a result. And women in our networks were able to identify that for those that were seeking pregnancy termination, Poland was not the right place to evacuate them to. That you had to, so you asked about rapid response versus general. We do both, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but we also tap into multiple talent sources and the real, like, on the ground sources. So as I said before, it's a sprint and a marathon at the same time. Cut me off if I'm going over time, but it's a sprint. Go. You want to cut me off?
In a moment. What I want to do is I want to ask everybody, you know, we're filled with a room of activists and philanthropists. Okay. And I have a note here. So I want to know, what exactly can we do? What can we do? And I mean that because we're here. We made the time. We took the time. So what can we do? Please, Melanie.
I mean, there's not one answer. There's a number of things. I mean, I think this ties in so much to what Heather Booth was talking about. I mean, she talked about illegitimate authority. I mean, any of you who rushed to the airports when the Muslim ban was announced, I mean, that's the kind of action and the kind of passion that we need to sustain, especially maybe going forward. Who knows what's going to happen next week or in 2 years. We are tired, but we have to keep going on these issues. It's, you know, this is not, immigration is not a problem. Like, you know, gun violence is a problem, but immigration, I mean, we're all immigrants, or, you know, our relatives were immigrants and refugees. These are people who just are moving to create a better life for themselves. I mean, we have to fight for that in this country. That's what, you know, so. Yeah. So, I mean, easier said than done because we're so exhausted and it's so scary, all the stuff that's looming, but we need to keep a piece of ourselves for that, because it really is a part of how we're fighting to preserve our democracy right now. And then, of course, you know, for foundations to be flexible and, you know, identify teams and work. I mean, we were so fortunate. We got we got 2 Mackenzie Scott grants. I mean,
Huge. Yeah, great.
You know, she wants a 3-page report every year. And, you know, I mean, our proposal was 10 pages long. So, anyway, and there's so many interesting things that people are doing. You know, I just had dinner last night with a friend who works at Define American. They did a study on reporting and the media and how better to portray immigrants and refugees in the media. Like, just tell a story about that happens to involve an immigrant, and people's minds change. 92% of the people who are, you know, had negative views about immigrants and refugees changed their minds after reading a story. It was about like Indian cricket players in New York or something. I mean, or North Carolina. I mean, like, there's so many, and you know, you don't think that makes a difference, but it does. So creative advocacy is critical. It's been challenging, but you know, and of course the services are also really important. And then one last thing, I know we don't have much time. You know, find a few facts about immigration and refugees and just be ready to deploy them at Thanksgiving and Hanukkah, and, you know, because there's so much misinformation out there. Go to our website. There are plenty of places. And just like, when they, when your uncle, whatever, says, well, they're all criminals, like, find that statistic that actually shows there's, immigrants and refugees are responsible for much less crime,
Absolutely.
So those are some of the things I would recommend.
Thank you. We have literally 2 minutes left. I first want to hit Charlene. Just give us a thought.
Okay, I'll be short. I'll amplify narrative change. I agree that like one of the most pernicious narratives out there is that refugees and immigrants are a drain on society. There's so much data out there. Just find it that they contribute to societies. Amplify the narratives of those with the lived experience. Talk to a couple of refugees, and try to tell their stories. And the other thing that I would say is that I think that we as activists and philanthropists, we underestimate, the private sector can really be engaged in this work. I think we saw that in Ukraine. Think about the widest possible network. What companies, what service providers, how can we engage private sector? This is such good work for the private sector, the philanthropy sector, and the public sector.
Thank you. And Dr. Paula.
I would say show up. On a larger level, we really can't let Putin win. It affects our democracy and Europe's democracy and Ukraine's democracy. And come with Levahad, show up with the orange vest, paint a refugee center, play with the kids. To quote the mother of a friend of mine who was a hidden child in Poland, she told my daughter and the other teenagers who came, don't underestimate what you're doing. No one came to play with me in the German DP camp.
Don't underestimate what you're doing, and you can at this moment text 44321. Convening 22. I'm telling you, every little bit helps. Thank you so much. Really, thank you. Thank you.